We would like to say welcome to Stammeklub, to Per Alm, a researcher and a writer about stuttering, among other titles, I
Så
guess.
mange tak.
So welcome. And the first question I would like to ask you is if you would like to start by introducing yourself and share a bit about your background, both personally and professionally.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, so thank you for the invitation. Well, I'm a person from Sweden, person who stutter, and I've now worked as a researcher but also teacher. So I had a quite long experience of stuttering. I think I began about the age of 3, but it became more of a problem in the school age. And I think I can say I had a quite severe stuttering in school age and young adult. And that made me interested because I could not understand my own stuttering really. So it was a mystery. So I began working as an engineer, but then changed into psychology and medicine and working about understanding the brain in relation to stuttering. So that's where I am at the moment.
Okay, so was that your motivation to change into psychology and medicine? Was stuttering your motivation?
Yes.
For the transition?
Yes, I wouldn't. Yes, then absolutely, because I did participate in therapy at that time. It was quite a lot focused on this called non-avoidance, to stop avoiding speaking and so that you don't let the stuttering be something that stops you in life. And I think that was very good in many ways. But I still stuttered as much as before, basically. So I was also, from a personal view, wanting to explore possibilities to communicate easier. Well, actually, I think it was from that age. I have just one image, one situation I remember, and it was at home with my older brothers, and they were older and they were talking quite a lot, and I wanted to say something, but I felt frustrated because both they were talking so much it was difficult to get heard, but also I remember I felt I got stuck. I think I repeated the words so I couldn't really say what I wanted. So I remember a frustration about that. But then I think it wasn't really much of a problem until school age.
Okay. Thank you. And that you have stuttered through life, and you mentioned that you started out with non-avoidance as the primary technique. Have you used any other ways to handle your stutter?
Yeah. I think that one thing that really sparked my interest to explore, to get into research and to different techniques, was then the American researcher Courtney Stromstad. Because in Sweden we have logoped Åke Byström. He arranged a summer camp with Stromstad. I think it was already 1990. And I was there. And he was using a technique focusing on co-articulation, so that you should aim for a sound a little bit ahead in the sentence, the second or the third sound in the word. And I've tried working with that, but I find it a bit complicated. It took a lot of thinking which sound is coming next and so on. But then I found from the United Kingdom, England, they at that time sold a cassette tape with audio recordings and a leaflet. So that's called slow prolonged speech, and it was basically a course in a stuttering technique focusing on practicing reduced speech rate, soft onset of voice, soft contacts between articulators, and so to say merging all the sounds together, blending them. And I worked quite a lot with that when I was 25, 30 years old, mostly at home. And I think that was the thing that have had the biggest effect on my speech fluency. I can say that I have never aimed for complete fluency. It doesn't really matter for me if I stutter a little or so on. I don't need to be stutter free, but I think it makes it easier if you have some tool so that you don't get stuck.
Okay, so is that also the technique you're using today with soft onset and the techniques taught on the cassette tape?
Pardon, cassette tape. Yeah, yes, yes. Now today I'm not using very much technique. Mostly I speak spontaneously, but once in a while when I feel I can use a little bit of technique, and then it's something similar. Slowing down a little bit just for the moment, because if you try to slow down all the time, then it becomes very monotonous, and that's not a very good thing. So I think you can just try to put in when you need it.
Okay,
that's good. So we want to move on to talk about your book, Stammen. What have inspired you to write it?
Well, I was when I had been to that Romsta course in 1990, I was also part of a stuttering group, a stuttering association in Lund, in Skåne, as you mentioned before when we talked. And I wanted to also involve other people and have other people to practice together with. So we started a study circle group to learn more about stuttering, to practice various speech techniques and practice speech to talk in front of each other and so on. And that concept, it gained interest from the Swedish Stuttering Association. So they applied for a project with funding, which you get. So I got employed by the Swedish Stuttering Association to collect information about stuttering, research and treatment and so on, and compile that to texts to initiate study groups in Sweden, in other local associations. And the end result of this work was a book that was published in Sweden, and it was partly translated to Danish. Actually, the last part was not included. That was about more practical speech program and so on. For some reason, they left that out.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Why they did that? It was out of your hands that they removed it.
Well, yeah, actually, I think the Swedish version cannot be bought in shops or so, but I have it on PDF. I will be happy to send it to you as a PDF file. You can remind me of that.
I have the book in Danish, but there isn't any that practical techniques in it, so it could be interesting to see.
Yes, and also that PDF file, that Swedish file, I'm happy to share that also if someone else. So
yeah, good to know.
Okay, so maybe
and
to some
that's the thing about
the listeners.
Yes. So.
Yeah, that's also okay with you.
Yes. Yes, I think actually it may be already linked on the Swedish Stuttering Association. I'm not really sure, but that's fine with me. So I can send it to you.
Okay. Cool.
Then we can just link to it in the show notes.
Just remind me.
That's the thing about your book. It's a few years since I read it, so maybe it's not totally correct. But as far as I remember about the theory behind stuttering, your conclusion in the book is that something happens in the brain that starts the stuttering circle, you could say, and then there's some psychology on top of that. But there is some neurological cause to it, but at that point you were not sure what it was.
No.
Have you been more enlightened on that, you could say?
Well, good question. Yes, I think that the basic outline as you describe are still subscribed to, that it has been increasingly clear that stuttering is not in basic, it's not a psychological problem, so to say. Children who begin to stutter are not more shy or anxious or so than other children. But of course, having an unpredictable speech problem like stuttering, it can result in social anxiety and so on. That's natural as a secondary effect. And so there is something which makes speech a little bit more difficult for persons who stutter. It's not entirely clear, but I think we are narrowing in on what it's about more and more. And well, then for most people, they don't have to talk about, they don't have to think about how to talk. They just think something, they want to say something, and then it happens. All the sounds and words just come out as they want to. There's a sort of effortless link between the intention and the mouth. For stuttering persons, that's sometimes not the case. There's an interruption, I would say, between the will to express something and what happens with the muscles. So the question is, what is the interruption there? And I think we need to look at the functions for automaticity. I mean, basically speech is a sequence of movements, a little bit like playing the piano. You're moving one finger at the correct time with the correct tension. So all the muscles in the mouth and throat need to get activated at the exact time. And that is something that is automatized. It's learned in children. So they are learning the pattern, which muscles need to get activated in which order to pronounce certain sounds. And then it just happens. So something with this execution of movement sequence, I think, is the essence of stuttering. The stuttering person sometimes get in a mood where the muscles are not really responding the way the person wants.
Okay, so somewhere between the brain and the muscles articulators, is that correct?
Well, not really between the brain. It's sometimes someplace inside the brain. I think will to describe the brain. In a way, we have many brains in the brain. We have parts of the brain at different levels. We have the intentional brain, where thinking about what we want to do, and that's mainly the cerebral cortex in the front parts. But then we also have parts of the brain working as a kind of support functions for the automaticity. And one part who's involved in that is the cerebellum, the little brain at the back of the neck. But we also have what's called the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia, that's basically like, if you're thinking about nuts, something like walnuts or so, inside the cerebral hemisphere. And the intention is that they should learn to do things so that we can do many things at the same time without thinking. But sometimes there can be some problem in their functioning, and I think that in a way is the key to stuttering.
Okay, so it should be understood like the whole root cause is happening in the brain, and the stuttering is just the outcome of that.
Yes,
you could say.
But also, I mean, the last decade or so, I've been looking more at what's happening in the mouth and throat, because I think that when you actually are stuttering, there's an interaction between what's happening in the brain and what's happened in the periphery, what's happening in the mouth. So, because sometimes there seems to be, for example, when you're having this very rapid repetition, so it seems like you have an unstable control system, that the brain is sending a signal to making a correction in one direction, and then it corrects in the other direction, but then it's too much, and then it starts to oscillate, getting too strong corrections in both ways, and then you sort of get stuck.
Okay. Yes, so it's too. I don't know. I'm trying to paraphrase to see if I understand it. But it's like the brain moving in two directions at the same time, and is kind of trying to figure out what to do.
Yes, a little bit like an sort of unstable system, unstable control system. Like if you're putting a pen in the palm of your hand, a pen standing, and you try to balance the pen. It's very difficult because it's unstable system. You will drop the pen, and I think it's a little bit like that. It may be an unstable system that you have difficulties balancing the output, but that also lead to a question: are all stuttering the same, so to say, or are there different subgroups? And we are starting to think that you probably in the future have to differentiate between different types of stuttering and so. But it has been difficult to really to know that. But I think we will learn more, I think, in the next decade about studying what's happening in the mouth and throat of persons who stutter.
Okay. Cool. And and also about learning more about stuttering, you have also done some research yourself. And what do you think are the most significant findings in your own research?
Well, when I was a doctoral student, one of my first papers I wrote, it was about the basal ganglia. And I think because I was noticing that so many things about stuttering pointed towards that region, that it would be symptoms from that region. So I wrote an article analyzing the indications for that, and that paper turned out quite well. So it has. I'm a little bit proud to say that it has been the most cited papers, the most cited paper on stuttering. So overall, so it has been something that many people have considered as a possible basic cause.
Okay.
So, and if I should mention one more thing, I don't know if you have seen or read about what I've written about stuttering and streptococcal infection. No. I published a paper in 2020, which was an analysis of historical data on stuttering. It started actually when I was looking in an old book by Charles van Riper. It was published data from a city in California. They have data from the number of children who stuttered in schools in that region, and it was data from 1945 to 1965. But in the period from 1945 to 1955, in 10 years, the number of stuttering children was reduced to about half.
Okay.
And then without any explanation. And no one could understand why had that been reduced to half in 10 years. Because after that, it's been to a stable level. So it was reduced during 10 years and then more stable. And I started to consider, what about penicillin? When did penicillin come here to that city? And it turned out that it was introduced to the public there in 1943.
Okay.
So if there was an effect of penicillin reducing some infection, that could explain this reduction for the next 10 years. So the next step was that I looked for old studies of stuttering and infection, and I found a very nice study from Chicago, published 1938. They looked at more than 400 children. They looked at the medical records from the was born until they were about 10 years of age, and compared that to 400 children who did not stutter. And then they compared all the diseases and everything they had. And the only thing that differed really was that the stuttering children had a lot more of streptococcal infections, and especially serious streptococcal infections, before they began to stutter. And this was really interesting because it is well known that this type of streptococcal infection, called group A streptococcus, it's known for often, or quite, actually it's the same bacteria that causes the common tonsillitis. So you probably had this bacteria. Most people had in one time of their life. It's quite common. But it also, in some cases, cause problems. It can cause what's called an autoimmune reaction. It can trigger the immune system of the body to react against certain molecules which are really part of the own body.
Okay.
That's known also to cause some neurological problems, some called the pseudonym chorea, or dancing disease, as it's called. You have involuntary movements. It's actually because of autoimmune reaction against molecules in the basal ganglia.
Okay.
And now, during the last decades, there's been talking about something called PANDAS. It's an abbreviation that stands for neuropsychiatric problems triggered by this group A streptococcus bacteria. And also, it's a reaction for molecules in the basal ganglia. And these children, they get symptoms like then obsessional compulsive symptoms. They have difficulties eating. They become then afraid of germs, cleaning their hands a lot. They can also get very anxious, afraid to separate from the parents and so on. And this often starts quite suddenly. So it's known that these bacteria can cause neurological problems related to the basal ganglia. And also, there's also other evidence which I don't need to get into. But the question has been, so to summarize, I would say that there's now very strong evidence that until like the 1960s or so, maybe the majority of stuttering cases was linked to streptococcal infection.
Okay.
And that's something that has not been known before.
No, that is quite interesting. Okay, so, but as far as I've understood, there's also a genetic part of stuttering. So is it maybe then the infection that is triggering some of the genetic disposition, I think you would call it?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Or I would say that most cases of stuttering today are not caused by infection. Certainly not.
Okay.
So probably that today often the genetics may be quite strong. But also when you're getting this autoimmune reaction from streptococcal infection, that seems to be also linked to genetics, because it's just certain people who have a genetic predisposition to get autoimmune reactions. So it's all linked together.
Okay.
So, but the question has been how many children and adults today are stuttering based on streptococcal infections, and that we don't know, but that's something we want to find out. There is actually a very recent study from Turkey who based on my theoretical paper checked the blood antibodies of children who stutter, and they actually confirmed that in Turkey there was a high rate of streptococcal infection in the children who stutter.
Okay. That's interesting.
But we need to have more studies like in the Western Europe, because there are some data that there may be this type of streptococcal infection may be about 6 times more common in Turkey than here. So that may be a difference between different countries.
But knowing all of this,
Okay, yeah, that's quite interesting.
With the staphylococcus infection, would you be able to, if you're listening to this podcast or seeing this podcast, would you be able to test yourself for this infection? And number 2, the $1 million question, would you be able to get some kind of cure for it, for this infection? And then the side benefits would be...
Yes, very good questions. Yes, for the first question you said, there's no really easy way for you to want to test this on your own. One thing you can do on your own is, first I want to say that in most cases it will not be this. I think it just quite rarely, maybe some percent of all. So that in most cases it will not be related to streptococcal infections at all. But it is possible to buy in the pharmacy now a home test for streptococcal infection, something like the COVID tests. You wipe your throat. And I think the problem is that it's not so very sensitive. I think if you're having a streptococcal infection, it will show positive result in about 60% of cases. So, yeah. Then it's possible to take blood samples, but that's difficult to get that done. It's difficult to get any medical doctor to want to do that, because we don't have any data yet. But hopefully in the future, if we get more data, we will know what to look for and can, to say, maybe when people are being assessed for stuttering, they also can do some blood tests to see if it is stuttering related to streptococcal infection. And then to your last question, can we do something about it? Well, the preliminary indication is that if we see this when it's quite early in the process, then it seems possible to treat with antibiotics or anti-inflammatory medications and so on. But we don't know really. I mean, antibiotics only work if you still have an infection. So otherwise, it's no use. So I've been a bit hesitant to talk about this because it may, obviously, it lead to a lot of thinking about, do I have it like this? But there are some indications. For example, if you, when looking at the stuttering, I think the greater likelihood that it could be related to streptococcal infection. For example, if the child was a little bit older when the stuttering began, because most cases of stuttering begin about the age of 2 and 3 and 3.5, and a little more unusually from age 4, 5, 6 or older. So if stuttering starts at these ages, one can think one more time about these things. And also if the stuttering starts suddenly, just from one day to the other, basically. And also and especially if the onset of stuttering is connected with some other changes in the child. For example, that a child which previously have been careless and happy and so on, suddenly become very anxious and start to be very picky with food and things like that, then that's an indication that something may not be really correct.
Okay.
So actually, so there are things like that which can be indications, but I would say that for now in Scandinavia, I would expect very few cases, just 1 or 2% or maybe something.
Yeah, so it's 1 or 2% of those who stutter who have this.
Yes.
And then it's only like theory if it is related or.
Yes.
So
yes, and also the 1 and 2%. That's my guess, my speculation. I don't really know. So we need to get data to really know about that.
Okay. Yeah.
So sure. But it is quite interesting.
Yeah. It's a cool theory. Okay, if we have to move on here, can you share a personal story or a moment that has significantly shaped your view on stuttering?
Oh, well, one thing that has, I think that when having severe stuttering, and when I was growing up, then people were making phone calls all the time. Now people are texting and so on, but then you had to talk. So, but when having severe stuttering and when you trying to make a phone call but not being able to say anything, and maybe the person the other end then hang up and so on, then, well, it shaped my view of how important it is to be able to communicate. So, and as I said before, I don't think it's a problem to having some stuttering, but if you're having stuttering so that you really cannot communicate, then it's a problem. So.
Okay. And have you noticed any changes in the perception of stuttering, both in academia and in the public, since you began getting interested in the topic?
Yeah, thank you. Good, interesting question. When I was beginning working with this, working with the book and so, then the mainstream in Scandinavia, it was this, as I mentioned, non-avoidance, acceptance philosophy, and also working with speech techniques where it was not really, almost not accepted, so to say, because one should work with acceptance on stuttering. But then I think there was a change. It has been a change, so it has become more open for people to be different, to work in different ways, to follow and try things. And I think that's very good, because I think this neurodiversity movement. Have you heard about that?
Not that much, but have seen like initiatives around on the internet at least.
Yeah, of course. Then, so neurodiversity, then it's a little bit back to acceptance, because they're arguing that, well, that stuttering, we're talking like this, we cannot magically take stuttering away, so then it should be accepted by society, and so. And I can agree on that. I think that the stuttering, that the society should accept stuttering, because we cannot really make stuttering go away. So, but for me, it's a little bit that views from when I was younger coming back. So my personal view is that I think we need to work both ways. We need to be more open about stuttering and be more, yes, like you're doing, having a podcast and so. But also for people who want to try to work with the fluency, I think that's fine for me.
Okay, yeah. So a more broader acceptance of different approaches, maybe.
Yes, that's what I want.
So, what is the most common myth about stuttering today?
Yeah. Well, I would. Well, I don't really know about today, but previously I would say that. Oh, something the camera has not. Well. It seems like something has happened.
We can still hear you, so it's all.
We can still hear you, so.
Yeah. So, well, yeah. Yes, I don't know about today, but I think that previously, at least, there has been a myth that stuttering is related to nervousness, that you're stuttering because you have some psychological conflict and so on. And I think that partly comes from the views of psychoanalysis and Sigmund Freud and so, who argued that stuttering does originate from an unconscious, sort of early psychological conflict.
Okay. Yes, that makes sense.
Which does not seem to be the case.
No, I agree. And you also mentioned some expectations for the next decade of research in stuttering. Do you have any specific expectations about knowledge of treatment or some specific fields you think will be extra interesting to be aware of?
Yeah. Well, I think that we are in a very interesting time now when it comes to the more medical understanding of stuttering, because we have not really had the methods and so on to really explore this. But I have contacts with person working in the United States, for example, with genetics. Now you can take what's been a gene. There are like 5 or 6 genes now known to be able to cause stuttering. And you can take one of these genes and move to a mice or rat. And then you can study what happens to the mice or rat. They don't begin to stutter. But you can study on a more detailed level what happens with the physiology in the brain and how it changes different processes to understand how can this gene lead to stuttering. And this type of work is underway. So I think there's many aspects related to the many medical aspects which I think will possibly change our views of stuttering within the next years or so.
Okay.
And yeah, leading
interesting and sorry.
Okay, yeah. So I would just jump to the next question here. Do you think it's possible?
Wait.
Okay, Alexander.
Okay. No, you can ask. Okay, sorry. We can just.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about it before about the staphylococcus infection. So building on top of this, do you think it's possible to find a cure for stuttering in the future? And if so, what might it be? Is it a cure where you have to take some medicine, or would it be a cure where you have to go some kind of therapy?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think there will probably not be any cure for all stuttering, such one cure for all, and the International Stuttering Awareness Day last year had the theme "One size does not fit all," and I think that's a very good theme, because I think that one size does not fit all when it comes to stuttering. We are different and we have different wishes and so on. So I think that when it comes to this type of questions and so, I prefer not to speculate too much, because the history of stuttering is there's a lot of broken hopes in the history of stuttering. People have thought, now we have solved it, and then no, not really. So, so I think it's maybe better to talk about things when they actually have happened. But it seems like in science about this, we need to work step by step. We will not find any magic overall cure, but I think that step by step we'll get a better understanding. Maybe some types of stuttering we'll be able to treat medically in the future. Other type of stuttering, maybe when working with speech therapists, we may develop how speech therapists work, because if we get better understanding of what is the problem and what happens in the mouth and throat and so, we may become more focused. So don't really believe in any cure in the foreseeable time, but I do hope for progress.
Yeah, but let's say the stuttering is connected to genes, like you mentioned before with the mouse and rat example. If this is the case, let's say in 10-15 years, we would be able to change the humans. I have no idea if it's possible in the future, but let's speculate here for some time, and I think in 10-20 years it's possible with AI, with technology, with everything. If you can change the genes, would it be possible with your knowledge?
First I want to say that from what is known so far, we know about like maybe 6 genes, but the problem is that there may be like 100 different genes who are involved here in different mixes in different persons. So it probably, if most person, it's not just one single gene, it's probably the mix of genes, and that makes it more difficult. But having said that, for example, the genes that they're working with in Washington, it's quite well known actually what those genes does. It is genes who are involved in the transportation of molecules within cells, a transportation for recycling of the molecules. So it is molecules involved in the cell metabolism. And how does this lead to stuttering? We don't know, but one idea is that it may result in at least some of the nerve cells need to signal very fast. They need to send very like 100 times per second. And if you're having just maybe a slight reduction in the energy production speed, you may have more difficult to produce this very rapid signaling when talking, and then you maybe get a more unstable system. That's one speculation. So in that case, maybe it can be possible to step up the energy production in some way. So you were also talking about it's possible to change the genes. Well, there are actually gene therapy going on, so that you are using certain type of viruses who are transporting the new gene into the cells so they are producing something we are missing, and so on. And this is a very, so far, quite science fiction, and will also be very expensive. But it's theoretically possible to a large extent, but in practice it will not be in foreseeable time.
Okay. Still interesting thought experiment.
Yeah.
So actually I have a little follow-up questions regarding to this. I had like 10 years ago, a friend said he know the reasons for stuttering, and I don't know if I would call it like a false belief, but he said that it was because the brain was thinking faster than the mouth was, opening. The signal some kind of was faster.
Okay. Yes, there was a little glitch in the sound here, but you mean that that the signal from the brain were too fast, you said?
Yeah, that was, a theory by a friend a long time ago.
Yes.
I have no idea if it's true or
Yeah.
if it's a false belief.
Yes, well, actually, that's a quite old theory that has been in different versions, that persons who stutter, in a way, are thinking faster than they can talk. I think that's probably not really the case. It has been some persons who stutter also have what's called, in Danish, it's called løbsk tale, and it means that you're talking, sometimes talking very fast, and people have difficulties hearing what you're saying. So I think that because some people have that also in stuttering, may have created an impression that you're talking too fast. I think another thing with stuttering can be that I know some people who stutter say that because that they get stuck sometimes, but then suddenly they're able to talk, and then they try to say as much as they can in this window when they are able to talk, because they know they'll soon get stuck again. So maybe they try to talk too fast then.
Okay.
That makes sense as well. Have tried it. Okay, and I would like to know if you want to add something to our previous discussions, something you feel like you haven't said yet before we are jumping to some concluding standard questions.
Okay. No, well, I think we covered quite a lot, and I think we can move on to the concluding questions.
Okay, great. Yes, so what has stuttering taught you on a personal level?
Oh, yeah. What stuttering taught me? Yeah, I think yes, a little bit like I mentioned before. I think it learned me that communication is important, and also how much in speech that happens that people don't really think about. I mean, speech is a very intricate process, and it's quite fantastic how most people can just talk without any effort at all.
Mm.
Okay. What is your best advice for others who stutter?
That's also a quite difficult question. As I mentioned before, I think that this one size does not fit all. It's important to remember. So if I should say something, I think it's very difficult to get some advice that is good for everyone. But one thing I think could be good for everyone is to try to be open about stuttering, and not that this was a bit difficult for me because I stutter, and just being open about that. And I say, or can you do this presentation next week? Yes, I can, but I have to admit that I'm a little bit cautious because I stutter. I mean, that you can mention that. You don't have to make up excuses why not to talk. You can say that you're anxious because you stutter, and people will understand that, and probably be very supportive.
Yeah. I think in this process, I feel it for myself that sometimes I feel embarrassed because I have a stutter.
Yes, that's absolutely. That I think that spontaneous reaction that maybe basically all people have is that you feel a bit embarrassed because you're in a way you're having problem with something that most people don't have problem with, and then it can be embarrassing. It's like, I guess that I have problems with reading and writing, and I guess that many people who have problem with reading and writing can tend to be quite ashamed of that, and don't want to talk about it. They also try to hide it and make up excuses for writing and everything. So I fully understand why you want to hide, and I wanted to hide. But I think that if you can break that and try the other way around, it will make life easier.
And it definitely is a process from starting at being more open to actually being comfortable with it, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. And also, so being open, I think when being open, it doesn't mean that I think you can be open and have different approaches. You can be open and wanting to change it, and you can be open and, so to say, accept that you stutter. It's up to you what approach you have. But, so, for example, you can say, I stutter and I try to work with it. It's not easy, but I'll try. And what you want.
Yeah, thank you. And in your opinion, how should one act when speaking with a person who stutters?
Yeah. Well, the traditional is to say that you should not interrupt and you should let people finish and so on. I think that's generally very good. Maybe not fill in and not talk for them, so to say. I think that I think that personally there can be exceptions to all rules. So a general rule is to try to be nice and be yourself when talking to people. I mean, you don't. I think that quite often people feel that you need to fix the problem of other people. You take responsibility of yourself and you try. But if you can try to avoid that and just let people stutter, and then I think it can be easier. It's not really up to the listener to fix the stuttering.
Oh, okay. So maybe also acceptance from the listener's point.
Yes. I mean, yeah.
Okay. Can you recommend a person or a topic we could feature in the podcast?
Yes. I got it before. When thinking about this, came to think about Hilda Sønsterud from Oslo, Norway. She did her PhD, I don't know, 2 years ago or something. She developed a program called MIST for stuttering treatment, and she also worked with a psychological method called ACT, which I think both are interesting. I don't know so much about MIST, so it would be interesting to hear more about that. So that is one suggestion.
Yeah, good one.
Thank you. So yeah, that was actually all the questions we had to you. So yeah, thank you for participating. It was really interesting to hear about your personal and professional experience in the topic. Very insightful.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure meeting you here, and I hope to be able to continue to work in this field.
Great.
We do too. That you continue.
Okay, thank you so much.